In the early evening hours of a Tuesday in March, Amelia Hayes sent her final text message. The digital missive, dispatched to her older sister, contained 3 simple words that were both reassuring and routine. Almost home now. But Amelia would never cross the threshold of her apartment again, and that brief message would become the final, haunting echo of a life abruptly silenced. The question that would torment her family and confound investigators for years was not merely what had happened to her, but who was responsible for a journey that ended not in the comfort of home, but in the vast, cold expanse of an unsolved mystery. Amelia Hayes was 27 years old, a vibrant and ambitious architect who had recently earned a junior partnership at a prestigious downtown firm. She was known among her friends and colleagues for her meticulous nature, her infectious laugh, and a quiet determination that had propelled her through a demanding academic and professional career. Her life was a carefully constructed blueprint of goals and aspirations, with each success building methodically upon the last. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, offered to help friends move, and still called her parents every Sunday evening without fail. That particular Tuesday had been a significant milestone for her. Her project team had just won a highly competitive bid for a new city library, a design to which Amelia had contributed countless hours of work and creative energy. The victory was a validation of her talent and a concrete step toward the future she envisioned for herself. To celebrate, the firm's senior partners had taken the team out for a celebratory dinner at an upscale restaurant. The evening was filled with laughter, toasts, and talk of the future. Amelia, typically reserved in large groups, was visibly radiant, her usual professional composure softened by the genuine joy of the achievement. She spoke enthusiastically about the next phases of the library project, her passion for sustainable design evident in every word. Her colleagues would later recall her being in high spirits, a picture of professional contentment and personal happiness. As the dinner wound down around 10 o'clock, a few members of the team decided to continue the celebration at a nearby cocktail lounge. Amelia, despite having an early meeting the next day, agreed to join them for a single drink. She was not a heavy drinker and was always mindful of her responsibilities, but the gravity of the occasion warranted a small extension of the festivities. She nursed a glass of wine, engaged in light conversation, and by all accounts, was the same responsible, level-headed person she always was. Shortly before 11:30 in the evening, Amelia announced her intention to leave. She hugged her colleagues, accepted their congratulations one last time, and stepped out onto the cool, damp city street. Her apartment was several miles away, a distance too far to walk, and in a direction not well serviced by late-night public transit. Following the established habit of a safety-conscious young woman living in a major city, she opened the ride-share application on her phone and requested a car. The app quickly matched her with a driver named Leo Vance, who was operating a dark blue sedan. The digital receipt of the transaction, which investigators would later scrutinize with painstaking intensity, showed that her ride was accepted at 11:37 in the evening. The estimated travel time to her quiet, residential neighborhood was approximately 22 minutes, depending on traffic. At 11:54 in the evening, while presumably en route, Amelia sent the text message to her sister, Charlotte. The message read, "Amazing night, won the library bid. Almost home now." Charlotte, already in bed, saw the message flash on her phone's screen. Smiling at her sister's success, she sent back a quick, "That's fantastic. Call me tomorrow," and drifted off to sleep, confident that Amelia was safe and sound. The next morning, the first sign that something was terribly wrong emerged quietly. Amelia was scheduled to lead a 9 o'clock project meeting to begin outlining the initial phases of the new library design. When she failed to arrive by 9:15, her direct supervisor, a man named David Chen, found it highly uncharacteristic. Amelia was the epitome of punctuality. She was often the first one in the office, her desk light glowing before anyone else's. David Chen placed a call to her cell phone. It rang several times before clicking over to her voicemail, the familiar, cheerful recording of her voice a stark contrast to the growing unease in his stomach. He tried her desk phone, then sent a text message, assuming she might have overslept after the previous night's celebration. When another 30 minutes passed with no response, he began to feel a genuine sense of alarm. He then called another team member who had been at the lounge, who confirmed Amelia had left alone in a rideshare just before midnight. This information did little to soothe his concerns. He decided to contact her designated emergency contact, her sister Charlotte. The call he made at 10:30 that morning shattered the normal rhythm of an ordinary Wednesday. Charlotte's initial reaction was one of confusion, not panic. She explained that Amelia had texted her the night before and had said she was almost home. Perhaps, she suggested, Amelia's phone had died and her alarm had failed to go off. But as she spoke the words, she felt a knot of dread tightening in her own chest. After hanging up with David, Charlotte began calling her sister's phone repeatedly, each unanswered ring amplifying her fear. By noon, with still no word from Amelia, Charlotte left her own job and drove to her sister's apartment building. She used the spare key Amelia had given her for emergencies and let herself into the small, tidy, one-bedroom unit. The sight that greeted her was both eerie and terrifying. The apartment was pristine, exactly as Amelia always kept it. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of a disturbance. The bed was neatly made, suggesting Amelia had never returned to it the previous night. Her laptop was on its charging stand on her desk, and a book lay open on the nightstand. The only things that appeared to be missing were the items Amelia would have had with her: her purse, her wallet, her keys, and her cell phone. It was as if she had walked out the door the previous morning and simply vanished on her way back. At 1:45 in the afternoon, a distraught Charlotte Hayes walked into the nearest police precinct and officially filed a missing person report for her sister, Amelia. The initial officer who took the report was polite, but conveyed a sense of procedural calm. He explained that it was not uncommon for adults to be out of contact for a day and that she might very well turn up with a simple explanation. But Charlotte's instincts told her this was no simple misunderstanding. She knew her sister, and this behavior was not just uncharacteristic, it was impossible. The case was assigned to a pair of detectives from the Missing Persons Unit, Detective Frank Miller and Detective Maria Santos. Miller was a veteran of the force, a cynical but thorough investigator with 2 decades of experience. Santos was younger, more tech-savvy, and possessed a keen sense of empathy that often helped her connect with grieving families. They began their investigation with the standard but critical first steps. Their immediate priority was to verify the last known movements of the victim. They confirmed with Amelia's colleagues the timeline of the dinner and the subsequent drinks. Everyone's story was consistent. Amelia had been happy, sober, and had left the lounge alone at approximately 11:35 in the evening to catch a rideshare. The digital footprint was their most crucial lead. Detectives submitted an emergency warrant request to the rideshare company for the complete trip details. The company complied quickly, providing a wealth of data that offered a digital skeleton of Amelia's final journey. The records showed the driver was Leo Vance. He was 42 years old, had been driving for the service for 3 years, and had a customer rating of 4.8 stars. His record showed no prior complaints of a serious nature. The trip data included a GPS map that traced the route the vehicle had taken. It showed Leo Vance accepting the ride, driving to the lounge, and picking Amelia up at 11:37. The route then proceeded directly toward her neighborhood. The car traveled through the city's main arteries before turning onto the quieter residential streets that led to Amelia's apartment. According to the app's data, the trip concluded at 11:58 in the evening. The GPS pin marking the end of the ride was located directly in front of Amelia's apartment building. The transaction was completed, and the fare was automatically charged to her credit card. On the surface, the data suggested a perfectly normal, uneventful ride that ended exactly where it was supposed to. But Amelia was not there. Detectives Miller and Santos drove to Leo Vance's registered address, a modest house in a working-class suburb. They found him at home, working on a car in his driveway. When they identified themselves and asked about the ride from the previous night, his reaction was one of mild surprise. He seemed to have no specific recollection of the passenger until they mentioned the pickup location and time. Vance told the detectives that he remembered the fare. He described his passenger as a young woman, well-dressed and polite, who had seemed pleased about something. He said she had spent most of the ride looking at her phone, occasionally smiling. He claimed that the trip was entirely unremarkable. He insisted, unequivocally, that he had dropped her off on the curb, right outside the address she had entered into the app. He told them that he had watched her walk toward the main entrance of the building before he drove away to wait for his next fare. When detectives pressed him for more specific details, however, his memory grew hazy. He could not recall what she was wearing with any certainty, nor could he remember if she had actually entered the building. He stated that he had simply assumed she did. The detectives asked for permission to search his vehicle. Vance consented without hesitation, appearing cooperative and unconcerned. The dark blue sedan was clean, almost immaculately so for a vehicle used for ride-sharing. The forensic team that was called to the scene conducted a thorough sweep of the car's interior, paying special attention to the back seat and the trunk. They collected vacuum samples, swabbed surfaces for DNA, and used chemical agents to check for the presence of blood. While the car was being processed, Miller and Santos continued their interview with Vance. They began to dig into his personal life and his background. They learned that he was divorced, had 2 children who lived with their mother, and was struggling with some significant financial debt. He drove for the rideshare service nearly 60 hours a week to make ends meet. This financial pressure was a potential red flag, a possible motive for robbery, but it was hardly conclusive evidence of anything more sinister. A background check on Leo Vance revealed a minor criminal record from over 15 years prior. He had been charged with misdemeanor assault following a bar fight in his 20s. The charge had been pleaded down to disorderly conduct, and he had paid a fine. He had no other arrests or convictions. While not pristine, his past did not paint the picture of a violent predator. Meanwhile, other officers were dispatched to canvass the area around Amelia's apartment building. They interviewed residents, asking if they had seen or heard anything unusual on the night of her disappearance. No one had. The building's security camera system was another promising avenue, but it quickly became a frustrating dead end. The main camera covering the front entrance had malfunctioned 2 days prior and had recorded nothing but static. A search team conducted a grid search of the immediate vicinity, looking in alleyways, dumpsters, and nearby parks for any sign of Amelia or her belongings. They found nothing. Her purse, containing her identification, credit cards, and keys, remained missing. Her cell phone's last known ping, according to data obtained from her service provider, corresponded with the location of her apartment at 11:57 in the evening, just before the rideshare trip officially ended. After that moment, the phone was either turned off or its battery had died. The initial forensic analysis of Leo Vance's car came back inconclusive. The vacuum samples contained a multitude of common fibers, hairs, and other microscopic debris consistent with a vehicle that served dozens of different passengers each week. There was nothing that could be definitively linked to Amelia Hayes. The chemical tests for blood were negative. The car, it seemed, was a forensic dead end. Days turned into a week, and the investigation seemed to be losing momentum. The public phase of the search began in earnest. Amelia's family, with the help of her employer and friends, printed and distributed thousands of missing person flyers. Her smiling face was suddenly on telephone poles, in coffee shop windows, and on community bulletin boards across the city. The local news media picked up the story, broadcasting her photograph and the details of her disappearance. The Hayes family held a press conference, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and anguish. Amelia's father made a tearful plea for her safe return, appealing directly to anyone who might have information. Charlotte spoke with a strength that belied her inner turmoil, describing her sister's kindness and ambition, painting a portrait of a person who was loved and desperately missed. She begged the public to remember any small detail from that Tuesday night. The public appeal generated a flood of tips to the police hotline, but most were well-intentioned false alarms or dead ends. There were supposed sightings of Amelia in other cities, theories from amateur sleuths, and even cruel hoaxes from people seeking attention. Each lead had to be meticulously followed and ruled out, consuming valuable time and resources while yielding no progress. Detectives re-interviewed everyone who had been with Amelia on her last night, searching for any overlooked detail. The focus of the investigation, despite the lack of physical evidence, remained squarely on Leo Vance. He was the last person known to have seen Amelia. His story, while plausible, was uncorroborated. Detectives brought him in for a second, more intensive interview at the precinct. This time, the tone was less conversational and more accusatory. They confronted him with the fact that he was their primary person of interest. Vance's cooperative demeanor began to fray under the pressure. He became defensive and agitated, insisting that he had done nothing wrong. He repeated his story multiple times, but detectives noted small, almost imperceptible shifts in his telling of the events. He first said he saw her walk to the door, then later said he saw her walk in the direction of the door. It was a minor discrepancy, but in a case with no other leads, it was enough to deepen their suspicion. Faced with mounting police scrutiny, Leo Vance hired a lawyer. On the advice of his counsel, he refused to speak any further with the investigators. This decision, while legally sound, only made him appear more culpable in the eyes of the detectives and the public. The media began to report on his status as a person of interest, and his name and photograph were soon circulating online, often accompanied by accusations and threats. The rideshare company suspended his account pending the outcome of the investigation. His life was turned upside down. He lost his primary source of income and became a pariah in his own neighborhood. Yet, despite the intense pressure and the cloud of suspicion hanging over him, the district attorney's office determined that there was simply not enough evidence to file charges against him. There was no body, no weapon, no forensic link, and no confession. There was only proximity and opportunity. As the weeks stretched into months, the investigation stagnated. The case file grew thicker with reports, interview transcripts, and forensic analyses that all led to the same frustrating conclusion. Amelia Hayes had vanished without a trace. The official search efforts were scaled back. The detectives, though still assigned to the case, were forced to dedicate more of their time to newer, more active investigations. The case was not officially closed, but it was rapidly growing cold. For Amelia's family, the lack of answers was a unique and relentless form of torture. They existed in a painful limbo, unable to grieve properly, but with dwindling hope for her return. Charlotte became the family's relentless advocate, creating a website dedicated to her sister's case and managing a social media page to keep her story in the public eye. She organized volunteer search parties on weekends, scouring parks, wooded areas, and waterways on the outskirts of the city. These searches were grueling, emotionally draining affairs. Each piece of discarded clothing or fragment of bone discovered by a volunteer would cause a spike of horrified adrenaline, only to be followed by the crushing disappointment of learning it was unrelated. The family offered a substantial financial reward for any information leading to Amelia's whereabouts, but even that failed to produce a credible lead. 2 years passed. The world moved on, but for the Hayes family, time had stopped on that March night. The detectives, Miller and Santos, had been reassigned. The case of Amelia Hayes was now a thick binder of paper in a filing cabinet, a cold case looked at occasionally by new detectives who would read through the file, see the same dead ends, and place it back on the shelf. The primary suspect, Leo Vance, had moved to a different state, attempting to escape the suspicion that had ruined his life. Just as it seemed the case would remain a permanent, painful enigma, a small, unexpected development occurred. A new detective, a young, tenacious woman named Sarah Chen, was assigned to the city's newly formed cold case unit. Her mandate was to review unsolved cases with fresh eyes and to see if modern forensic technology could shed new light on old evidence. The Amelia Hayes file was one of the first to land on her desk. Detective Chen spent weeks immersing herself in the case. She read every report, every transcript, and every lab result. She was struck by the complete lack of physical evidence. But one small detail in an early evidence log caught her attention. During the initial canvass of the area outside Amelia's apartment, a crime scene technician had collected a single, small, silver earring from the gutter, approximately 20 feet from the building's main entrance. At the time, the earring had been logged and processed, but its significance was unclear. It was a common, inexpensive piece of jewelry. Charlotte had been shown a photograph of it, but in her distress, she could not definitively say whether it belonged to her sister. With no other evidence to connect it to the crime, it had been filed away and largely forgotten. Detective Chen, however, knew that forensic technology had made incredible leaps in the intervening years. Techniques for extracting and analyzing touch DNA had become exponentially more sensitive. She located the earring, still sealed in its evidence bag in the property clerk's office, and submitted it to the state crime lab with a request for the most advanced DNA analysis available. Weeks later, the results came back, and they were stunning. The lab had been able to isolate a tiny, partial DNA profile from the surface of the earring. It was a male profile. The first and most obvious step was to compare this profile to the DNA of their only person of interest, Leo Vance. His DNA had been collected voluntarily during the initial investigation. The lab ran the comparison. It was not a match. This revelation was a bombshell. For years, the investigation had been built on the assumption that if foul play had occurred, the rideshare driver was the most likely perpetrator. The DNA evidence now suggested that another, unknown male had been in contact with that earring. The profile was entered into the National DNA Database, CODIS, but it returned no hits. The unknown male was not a convicted felon. This could have been another dead end, but Detective Chen was not deterred. She successfully petitioned for the use of a newer, more controversial investigative tool, forensic genetic genealogy. She submitted the partial DNA profile to a specialized private lab that could upload it to public genealogy websites. These sites allowed users to upload their own DNA data to find relatives. The hope was that the unknown male's DNA might share enough common markers with one of the millions of users in the database to identify a distant family member. The process was slow and painstaking. Genealogists worked backward from the DNA, identifying a third cousin of the unknown male who had uploaded their data to a family tree website. From there, they began to build out a complex family tree, using public records like birth certificates, marriage licenses, and obituaries to trace the descendants of the common ancestor. They were looking for a male from a specific branch of the family who would have been in the city at the time of Amelia's disappearance. After months of meticulous research, the genealogist narrowed the possibilities down to two brothers. One lived on the other side of the country and had no connection to the city. The other was a man named Mark Renshaw. When Detective Chen read the name, a chill went down her spine. She recognized it instantly from the original case file. Mark Renshaw was one of Amelia Hayes' colleagues. He had been at the celebration dinner and the cocktail lounge on the night she vanished. The investigation, once cold, was now blazing hot. Detective Chen and her team opened a new, covert investigation into Mark Renshaw. They learned that in the years since Amelia's disappearance, his career had flourished. He had been promoted to the position that many had assumed would one day be Amelia's. He was now a senior partner at the firm, married with 2 children, and living in an affluent suburb. He was, by all appearances, a respected professional and a pillar of his community. Detectives began to discreetly re-interview other colleagues who had been present that night. This time, they asked different questions, not just about Amelia's state of mind, but about the interpersonal dynamics within the project team. A more complex picture began to emerge. While most had described the team as collaborative, a few recalled a subtle professional rivalry between Mark and Amelia. They learned that Mark had been the runner-up for the junior partnership that Amelia had earned 6 months before her disappearance. He had reportedly been gracious about it publicly, but some co-workers noted that he seemed privately resentful. He had also been the lead on a previous project that had gone over budget, a failure that had likely cost him the promotion. Amelia's success on the library project had only served to highlight his own recent shortcomings. The motive, once a complete mystery, was beginning to crystallize. It was not a random act of violence or a crime of opportunity by a stranger. It was potentially a crime born of professional jealousy and rage. But they still needed direct evidence to tie Mark Renshaw to the crime. They needed his DNA to compare directly with the profile from the earring. A surveillance team was assigned to monitor Mark. They followed him for several days, waiting for an opportunity to obtain a discarded item. The break came when Mark stopped for coffee on his way to work. After he finished his drink, he tossed the disposable cup into a public trash can. A detective, posing as a sanitation worker, retrieved the cup moments later. It was sent directly to the crime lab. The lab technicians swabbed the rim of the cup and extracted a full DNA profile. They compared it to the partial profile recovered from the earring found near Amelia's apartment. It was a perfect match. The detectives finally had their man. They now had the irrefutable scientific evidence needed to secure an arrest warrant. A team of officers arrived at Mark Renshaw's prestigious architecture firm during business hours. They walked into the sleek, modern office and arrested him at his desk in front of his stunned colleagues. He was taken into custody and transported to the same precinct where the investigation had begun years earlier. His confident, professional demeanor crumbled as the handcuffs were placed on his wrists. In the interrogation room, faced with Detective Chen and a mountain of evidence he never knew existed, Mark's composure shattered completely. At first, he tried to deny everything, claiming it was a terrible mistake. He said he had barely known Amelia and had considered her a friend. But when Chen laid the photograph of the earring on the table and explained the DNA match, the color drained from his face. His denials grew weaker, his story filled with inconsistencies. He tried to suggest that perhaps he had brushed past her and the earring had fallen, or that his DNA had been transferred in some innocent way. But the science was irrefutable. Over the course of a grueling, hours-long interrogation, the truth finally emerged in a torrent of confession. Mark admitted that he had been consumed by a bitter jealousy of Amelia's success. He felt she had been given opportunities he deserved, and her victory with the library project had felt like a personal humiliation. On the night she disappeared, he had not gone straight home from the lounge as he had originally claimed. He had stewed in his car for a while, his resentment festering. He had decided he wanted to confront her, to clear the air, as he put it. He had known where she lived and had driven to her neighborhood. He saw the rideshare car pull up and saw Amelia get out. He had parked his own car down the street and had approached her as she walked toward her building's entrance. His intention, he claimed, was just to talk. But the conversation had quickly escalated into an argument. He had accused her of undermining him at work, and she had defended herself, telling him his accusations were baseless. In a fit of rage, he had grabbed her. She had struggled, and during the altercation, he had struck her. She had fallen backward, her head hitting the hard edge of a stone planter near the sidewalk. The single earring had been torn from her earlobe in the struggle. In that moment, Mark realized what he had done. Panicked and terrified of the consequences, he made a fateful decision. He saw that no one was around. He quickly put Amelia, who was unconscious but still alive, into the trunk of his car. He then drove out of the city, heading toward a remote, wooded state park that he knew from childhood camping trips. In a secluded area deep within the park, he had taken her from the trunk. The terrible act that followed was one he recounted with a chilling lack of emotion. He had ended her life to ensure she could never identify him. He then buried her body in a shallow grave, concealing it with leaves and branches. He had disposed of her purse and phone in a weighted bag, throwing it into a deep reservoir on his way back to the city. Mark provided the detectives with a hand-drawn map to the location of the grave. The next day, a team of investigators and forensic anthropologists, guided by the map, located the site. After carefully excavating the area, they found the skeletal remains of a young woman. Dental records soon provided a positive identification. After years of agonizing uncertainty, they had finally found Amelia Hayes. The news was delivered to the Hayes family in a quiet, somber meeting. The confirmation of their daughter's death was devastating, a final brutal blow that extinguished the last embers of hope. But it was coupled with a small, cold comfort. The knowledge of what had happened and the certainty that the person responsible would be held accountable. The torment of the unknown was finally over. Mark Renshaw was charged with first-degree murder. His trial was a somber affair, followed closely by the local media. The prosecution laid out the case with methodical precision, from the initial disappearance to the advanced DNA science that had identified the killer. The defense tried to argue that the death was an accident, a result of a confrontation gone wrong, but the jury was not swayed by his self-serving narrative. After deliberating for only a few hours, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Mark Renshaw, the successful architect and family man, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, delayed for so long, had finally been served. The man who had harbored a secret, murderous resentment behind a facade of professional collegiality would spend the rest of his life paying for his crime. In the aftermath, the case of Amelia Hayes served as a grim reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight. It was not a monster who emerged from the shadows that took her life, but a colleague who sat beside her in meetings, a man who had smiled and congratulated her on her greatest professional triumph just hours before he killed her. Her death was a senseless tragedy, a life full of promise extinguished by petty jealousy and uncontrolled rage. Amelia was remembered not for the tragic circumstances of her death, but for the vibrant life she had lived. Her family established a scholarship in her name at her alma mater, supporting young women pursuing careers in architecture. Her friends and former colleagues dedicated the completed city library, her final project, in her memory. A small bronze plaque near the entrance bears her name, a permanent tribute to the talent and spirit that had helped create the beautiful space. The building stands as a testament to her vision, a legacy of creativity and light that outshone the darkness that had ended her life. The resolution of her case brought a painful closure to her loved ones, but the void left by her absence would never truly be filled. The story of her disappearance and the long, arduous search for the truth became a cautionary tale about the complexities of human nature and the incredible power of perseverance. It highlighted the devastating impact of a single horrific act and the tireless dedication of those who refuse to let a victim be forgotten. The journey to find justice for Amelia Hayes was long and fraught with frustration and false starts. It was a path that led investigators down the wrong road for years, focusing on a man who, while in the wrong place at the wrong time, was ultimately a victim himself of circumstance and suspicion. The case demonstrated that the most obvious answer is not always the correct one, and that the truth can remain hidden for years, waiting for a fresh perspective or a technological key to unlock it. Leo Vance, the rideshare driver, eventually received a public apology from the police department for the years he spent under a cloud of suspicion. The statement acknowledged that the intense focus on him in the early stages of the investigation had been a mistake, a consequence of tunnel vision in the absence of other leads. While the apology could not restore the years he had lost or erase the public condemnation he had endured, it was a formal acknowledgement of his innocence. The story also underscored the profound evolution of forensic science. Without the development of sensitive touch DNA analysis and the innovative application of genetic genealogy, Mark Renshaw's secret might have remained buried forever along with his victim. It was a testament to the idea that evidence is patient and that science can often provide a voice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The single forgotten earring in an evidence locker became the key that unlocked a years-old mystery. In the end, the narrative of Amelia Hayes is one of profound tragedy, but also one of enduring love and relentless pursuit of justice. Her family's refusal to give up, coupled with the dedication of a cold case detective who saw an opportunity where others saw a dead end, ensured that her story did not end with a question mark. They found the answer, as painful as it was, and in doing so, they honored her memory by ensuring her killer could not escape the consequences of his actions. The city library now stands as a beacon of knowledge and community, its clean lines and open spaces a reflection of the architectural vision Amelia had championed. Visitors who walk through its doors are unknowingly interacting with her legacy, a beautiful and functional space born from her passion and hard work. It is a quiet, powerful rebuttal to the senseless violence that took her life, a symbol that what we create with purpose and dedication can long outlast the destructive impulses of hatred and jealousy. The world is a lesser place for the loss of Amelia Hayes, and for all the other lives cut short by needless violence. Her story compels us to look beyond the surface, to recognize the complexities of the human heart, and to appreciate the fragile and precious nature of a life lived with purpose and kindness. It is a somber chapter in the annals of crime, but one that ultimately affirms the importance of truth and the unyielding fight for accountability. If you found this case compelling, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on similar true crime investigations. The stories of the victims deserve to be told, and the pursuit of justice is a cause that merits our unwavering attention and support. Until next time, stay aware, stay compassionate, and look out for one another.